Anything under $10,000, I have permission to grant. They
Isn't
can
that
write
nice?
us.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Well, Brother Andy, I'd like to talk a little bit off air if you have a moment.
but there was a greater sense of respect for the elderly, doing things for the elderly, responding to the elderly. I don't think I carried my luggage once. They did a procession, the Good Friday procession, which probably was about 8 hours long, and hundreds of people.
Wow.
As the
Tito, you
procession
doing that?
moved.
Ooh. I mean, I'll be part of the team.
So, Tito, I got a fun question for you today. You
Okay.
get to be a part of a fantasy world, fictional fantasy world, anyone
Okay.
you want, but you are still you. Okay, so you don't
Okay.
have magical powers. You're not a wizard. You're not Harry Potter or anything. But what do you pick? You get Harry Potter, Star Wars, Star Trek, DC, Marvel, Disney, Pixar, anything you want.
I think I would pick Lord of the Rings.
Oh,
And here's
okay.
and here's why. Because at least as a spiritual figure, a spiritual leader, I feel like there would still be some something I could contribute to that world. Like, as much as I love Star Trek, I prefer Star Trek. It's not it's a world imagined, and it's imagined kind of without religion. So I wouldn't. As much as I enjoy watching Star Trek, it's probably not a world that I want to participate in.
Yes, you went with a serious answer. Yeah,
I did.
I think that's okay. But, like New Zealand, yeah, sure, let's go to New Zealand.
No.
It's also the most terrifying
Middle-earth.
world.
Yeah,
Come on.
I know.
And with all the orcs and all that, all constant battles.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going Star Wars for nothing else because you can literally travel to other planets. Like any normal person can do that.
It's always at war.
Yeah, but like the rebellion. Come on, it's exciting.
I mean, yeah, it's exciting, but at least the Middle Earth has like these long stretches of peace. Oh my gosh, no, Star Wars is like that galaxy is always at war. No thanks.
Okay, well,
The minute they defeated the Emperor,
it started again.
The First Order, rose up, and it all started all over again.
well, it's fun to live in fantasies for a bit, but it's also fun to come back to the real world. And let's talk today with a guy who very much lives in the real world and makes the world happen in some ways. There are missionaries that go and they work all around the world. They serve people in great need, but where do those missionaries get the resources to do that? How do people get the opportunity to build houses? Where do we get the money for all that? It comes from this man right here, not from his own pockets, from all his work fundraising. We're welcoming Andy Brophy here. He is the development of our mission office and an extraordinary guy that we got to meet a couple years ago. Andy, welcome to the show.
Good to be here.
So tell us, you have an interesting position. You get to travel a little bit, but really you're kind of the guy who carries the purse.
Yes, and a lot of people follow me behind as I carry the purse. Um,
Yes.
yeah, it's something I started 7 years ago. I was asked to be the executive director of the General Secretariat of the Franciscan Missions, an office that started in the United States in 1964. I don't have much history as to why they picked the U.S. or why they picked the Friaries of the Assumption Province, but that's where it started, and that's where we've stayed in that neighborhood. And we are an office of the General Curia, our office in Rome, and our task is to raise funds for friars missions projects throughout the world, and there's plenty of need. So we're always asking people for help. And you're right, it's not from my pocket. It really comes from our very, very generous benefactors from predominantly the U.S., but just recently online we're getting contacts in other parts of the world too. So it's
So
a
are you one of
unique
these like
position.
missionaries that goes from parish to parish preaching on the weekends? Is that we're all familiar with that sort of fundraising. Is that what you do, or you do
Right.
something else?
That's part of the program here. We have mission appeals. We bring friars in. This year, going to bring some friars in from the Philippines, Mexico, and from Brazil, and they will be assigned to parishes to speak throughout the country. Mostly happens in the summertime. That's when the diocese, put the time frame in. And that's still good because for many people, it's the only time they will ever meet a Franciscan. and someone from another country. Things have changed, and I don't think there's as much mingling with missionaries as there was before. So it's a good experience, and we never know how their visit impacts people, because it doesn't necessarily mean we will receive donations that week. It could be long term, and it's really good. The other
Yeah, so instead of
component
going
is
to
our,
the countries themselves, you get to kind of bring those countries to our world, which I think is
exactly.
a wonderful thing that we Franciscans get to do.
Exactly. And these guys are from these countries and they have these experiences. These are firsthand experiences of various parts of the world. I think that a great benefit for the people that they preach to as well.
I think when a lot of people think about, missionaries and fundraising, this is kind of what they imagine. At least it's been maybe most people's experience of it. But you and I are on the committee discussing interest in foreign missions, and you mentioned during one of our meetings, I'm not going on mission, but I want to. I'm an interested party in this. And I mean, nobody questioned that because everyone there relies on you, relies on the work that you do, and so you kind of present a different aspect to mission work that I think a lot of people overlook.
I would love to go on mission. And, from my early youth, in our province, every 3 years, it was the Assumption province, every 3 years around the time for chapter, we received a survey. One of the questions were, what would you like to do? My three answers were always education, formation, and mission work. I did education and I did formation. And by the time I got to do mission work, I felt I wasn't as healthy as I should be to go to other countries. So when I was asked to do this, it was my way of supporting the missions. Maybe not going to them to work myself, but a way to support the work that occurs throughout the order. And it is really worldwide. Our reach is from Vietnam. This last meeting was Vietnam, multiple projects in Africa, Argentina, multiple projects in Philippines, different countries. So our reach is throughout the world.
So tell us a little bit about the funds themselves. I don't need your balance sheet or anything like that, but is it just supporting the friars who are doing work there, or where does this money go?
When I was asked to take the position by the Minister General Michael Perry at that time, he told me we need to spread out who we contact, the Franciscans throughout the world. And that's something that we have done the last couple years. Franciscans, provinces, custos, they contact us for funds. It could be an education program, scholarships for children. It could be the one program we do in India. If you remember the movie Slumdog Millionaire, the children that live in the trash dumps and have to collect rags to sell, and then they can't go to school. So the Friars in India have set up a program, several centers, as a matter of fact, to educate the children so that they at least can have a piece of paper to say that they graduated, and then they can move on. So we have expanded our reach, and it could be for building a church, we're building homes in Guinea-Bissau, in Camorra Hospital. They're homes for lepers, clinics, teaching. I get confused because we have so many things sometimes.
I imagine it's difficult, our funds aren't unlimited, although we have wonderful, generous benefactors. But how does that process work of those different mission groups kind of expressing their need and then deciding what we're able to give and how much we're able to give?
Okay, our office is under a board of directors, and presently the board of directors is 3 friars from the Curia, General Curia in Rome, and 7 friars from the United States. They're representative of the province of Immaculate Conception and the new province of Our Lady of Guadalupe, and elected friars. So they could be from various places. Anything under $10,000, I have permission to grant. They
Isn't
can
that
write
nice?
us. Yeah.
Well, Brother Andy, I'd like to talk a little bit off air if you have a moment.
Okay.
We promise to keep it under 10,000.
Yeah, yeah, that's happened more and more. But they have to go
Do you
through
really
the
want
same
this
process.
online? The Friars are going to watch this.
We'll have to think about that. And they have to go through the same process. They have to complete an application. They have to give the recommendation of the provincial, their custos, etc. So it just can't be a friendly phone call or a letter. We have to go through the process. I do discuss it in the office. I have 3 other friars here who are, 2 are from Mexico and 1 is from India. And the 2 friars from Mexico studied in the Holy Land. So they know lots of friars throughout the world. And the friar from India was a missionary in Africa for 16 or 17 years. So he knows friars. So we sometimes look and say, okay, what do you know about this project? What do you know about this person? You know, and then I can approve those. Anything above 10,000 goes to this board of directors. And the board of directors meets 3 times a year via video call. And 1 time a year, we meet for 2 days in person. And they get to select what gets approved and how much. Before they get them, we will vet some, you know, that we just don't think are something we could really support, and the rest we let them decide. And I have to say they've been very good with that. It takes some time because these are complicated. Sometimes the projects. Sometimes they're straightforward. So, yeah, but it has to come through a higher power than I.
Sure. So this is kind of the 25,000-foot view of what you do. Now let's get to the ground. Is there something in the last couple years that's really just touched your heart or said, wow, I can't believe we got to do that?
You know, as part of our ministry, we have been able to travel. We were really held back during the COVID years. But the friars we've gone to, the 2 of the friars just returned from Guinea-Bissau, Africa, visiting what was a leprosy hospital at one time. I'll be going to the Philippines. We've been to various countries in Africa, other countries in Asia. Those trips are the things that probably touch me the most. And I'll give you the example. The one, we were in the Philippines in 2019, and we were working with a friar who was feeding about 100 children a day. And it was all organized and worked out. Parishioners were involved and young people. Every day they fed, I think they fed over 100 people, to be honest. And many of these children, and this is where we started it, many of these children were, they did not have mother or father, or they mostly didn't have a father, and that was because they were victims of the extrajudicial process in the Philippines under the previous president, where people who had any connection with drugs would come in and report, and often several days to a week later, they would be dead. So there were 100 children in this program, in this little parish alone, that had no family. So they have to go live with someone, an aunt or an uncle. Many of them were on the street. And to see these children every day get a great meal, really good meal, the people were very well behind it. It was a lot of food. Maybe not for me or us, but for the children, it was a lot of food. And almost all of them would bring a little baggie or a Tupperware, and they would put the extra food in that to take it home to their brother or sister who were still at home. That something like that really touched my heart, because we were not just feeding. You know, sometimes you get into these programs and it's numbers and results and goals and objectives, but we were doing much more than that. There was feeding going on of this particular group, but they were going out and feeding their brothers and sisters. And I think for the parish in the feeding program, it had a tremendous impact on and on everybody, and that it did on
Feeding
me.
you in a different way.
Feeding me. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Yeah, it was a good meal too.
Well, that's a part of that, you know, that program that president unfortunately instituted. I never really thought about. I never really considered like, what if these people have kids and now they have either no parents or they've lost one of their parents. That's pretty. It's a tragic part that I didn't think about, and
it's horrible to think about.
Yeah.
I mean, we followed it from the U.S. for so many
Right.
years, and seeing all this, and I got to think you feel powerless. I mean, I know I do. I mean, you two as well. What do you do, Tito, Andrew?
Right.
Like thinking about around the world the issues I can't fix.
No, this came to us from a friar who was the pastor, and it's in the slums. The parish is in the slums. There's nothing nice around it. But he was surprised one day when he saw a probably 9 or 10-year-old girl carrying her brother on her back, who was about 3, and they were going through the trash looking for food. And he talked to them and why, and they told him their parents were killed and etc. It impacted his life. And it was amazing how the parish surrounded these people, brought them in for Christmas parties and things like that. So a little thing went to a very big thing. It was great impact on people. Yeah.
I'm wondering what the most interesting place you visited, and which is interesting that you get to visit these places and you get to kind of evaluate them. You don't stay a whole long time, but is there one? You're going to the Philippines this week, but you've been to quite a few countries, right?
Yes. Oh, man. They're all unique. I mean, you can't compare the countries of Africa with something like Asia. They're all very unique. And there are countries in Africa which they seem very well off. The people live in some kind of house, maybe not the best house. But then there's other places where they have nothing. Many built their houses out of mud or adobe, and over the years they fall apart. So they might be living in a section of the house that still exists. And even there, some of the schools I toured were made of mud. The kids sat on a bucket or whatever they could bring from home. There were no desks. The floors were dirt floors, no windows and no doors. And the director, the principal of the school, shared a room next to the kitchen. So while they were cooking, his office was next door. There were no walls, Yeah. And cooking is an essential element because they get to feed the children. And in a school like that, they get at least a daily meal. So that's just so different from another country that I might go to that just has a different culture, different style of life, etc. What's amazing, though, the places we've been in several of the countries, in Tanzania, Uganda, Zimbabwe, and then even if I go to Asia, Singapore, the countries, Manila, there's this huge growth of Catholicism. Huge, and particularly in Africa, to the point where no one can count, hundreds of children come in to church, start sitting on the bench, and as the elders come in, they get off the bench and sit on the floor. It's just amazing the liturgies that can happen in a place like that. It's just full of people.
So why is this? Do you have a sense of why certain countries are growing rapidly right now while others in the West are not?
I think it's the Catholic spirit. There's certain Catholic spirituality that people can understand, they can relate to. We were in, and I'm sorry because I remember it was a number of countries. I think this was Uganda, where for Good Friday, and they did a procession, the Good Friday procession, which probably was about 8 hours long, and hundreds of people.
Wow!
As the procession
Tito, you doing
moved.
That? I mean, I'll be part of the team.
Well, I'll be honest. I had to stay out because I would have been sunburnt and dying, but I did see the last part of it. In the same place in Zimbabwe, there was it was Easter, and there were supposed to be like 75 First Communions and 58 confirmations, and I don't think anyone really knew how many there were. It just kept coming forward and coming forward. Yeah, I think there's something with the Catholic spirituality, the Catholic Church, that the faith is growing greatly. Yeah.
I mean, I've always wondered about that too, and I think part of it is that our faith, especially the Catholic theology on the perspective of hardship, is one that gives it not just meaning but purpose, right? We are able to take hardship and add it to the redemptive process. It makes us, in a certain sense, better, and it gives that meaning. In a society where we try to avoid hardship as much as possible, it's harder for people to remember the deeper meaning of that.
Right. I agree. Yeah. Yeah.
I'm wondering, in all this, talking about the hardship, do you encounter Christians that are truly persecuted? Yeah, not in like the American sense, like we're not the first in line, but people who are actually killed for their faith or have to live in silence or fear.
Yeah, yes, unfortunately, I have not been to those places or experienced that, but I do hear back from the friars, and quite disturbing, some of the things that I've seen, where, like one, they sent me a video and a school teacher was beheaded live on camera. She was Catholic. Yeah, Miramar, where people are trying to practice their faith. And there's great discrimination. Even India, there's great discrimination in India against non-Hindus. So they're trying to pass laws to make it harder for Christians to thrive, Catholics to thrive, and of course Muslims. So yeah, we do see that, and of course, working with places around the world, I don't want to say too many of the exact locations, but something like Syria, where the friars are doing tremendous work. But they ask us not to tell the location of their churches, which is understandable.
It's incredible following these things where these tragedies happen, or there's persecution or some earthquake, and the friars are there because they're already on the ground.
Right.
I remember reading a story a number of years ago of Friar being kidnapped. And he was missing for a couple days, and then he came back, and just the heroism of these guys, and also the lay people, and the men and women that don't have a choice to stay here, and just the love they show for their faith, that they're not willing to give it up.
No, yeah. I know these friars, and I don't know if I should say the country, but they're out in a remote area. They have 4 proper parishes and then 12 compounds, compound parishes out further, and they have to drive to them. And he took a video. They were driving this Jeep that I suspect the American friars bought in the 1960s. Because I know American friars were there. There were holes in the floor, and they're going through this terrible terrain. And he was saying, he was a deacon at the time. He showed me the parish priest and then the altar server, and behind him was the guard with a gun.
Gosh.
And it isn't so much to hurt someone as it is much to say, hey, we have this, and keep people away. I know sometimes I'm inconvenienced because I have to get up at a certain time because the friary mass has been changed by 15 minutes, and it's a different world. Yeah.
Someone's rude to you. They say some bad word.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, my life's terrible.
I've been oppressed.
Right.
Oh,
exactly.
Gosh.
Yeah.
No, I remember there being there was a general chapter in Assisi that I just happened to be in Assisi at the same time, and I was chatting with one of the friars, and I said, "So you're free today?" And he goes, "Oh, no." He goes, "But right now they're discussing friars in countries that we can't make public, so anyone who's not essential has to leave the room." And I was like, "Oh, okay." And that really kind of drives it home of like we have friars and brothers in places where it's on a need to know basis, and it's not because we're trying to hide or mislead people, but because it's for their own safety and protection and the people that they serve.
Yeah, there's a couple places like that, and we won't even get information on it, and I have to respect that.
Yeah, they're like CIA agents. I mean, they're sleeper cells. They're there for not violence, but for love and for peace. And
Yep.
Right.
it's amazing to
Yeah.
hear some of these stories that we hear after the fact, that they're really putting their life in danger in a way that we in the Western world don't think about much anymore. But this is like the early church again. I mean, they're
Right.
undercover, they're underground, and the church exists because of them. It's just so amazing.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
So I mean, I know you've gotten to travel a lot, in your work for this office, but you also were a general visitator. Am I right?
Correct. Yes. If my count is
Explain
correct,
what that
5
is.
times. Okay. General Visitator is appointed by the Minister General to take his place to visit a province more often during the time of a chapter. So the General Visitator is representing the Minister General provinces throughout the world. So it's always happening because there's always chapters going on, and it's a ton of work because there's also many reports that have to be filed because the general visitator is feeding back information to the minister general for information for a picture, to build a picture of this entity that we may have visited. Fortunately, I started with a very kind province of St. John the Baptist out of Cincinnati. So,
Fellow Americans, yeah.
Yep.
yes, fellow Americans and semi-Midwesterners like I was at the time. And that was my first visitation, which was really, they were 200 some friars in those days. And
So it's basically an audit, right? I mean, not so much the books, but like the friars. You've got to interview every single friar. So that's 200 interviews, multiple conversations of what's the life of this place? What are they struggling with? That's got to be exhausting, as you say. It's not just a lot of work, but just emotionally exhausting.
yeah, it is. It can be. Some friars are very comfortable doing that. Speaking. Some friars are not comfortable doing that. Who is the stranger? But yes, there's various questions you need to know to get about their life, the fraternity's life, and the province's life, to build that picture to send to the minister general and to the general definitorium. And there is a book. It's the infamous blue visitation book that presents areas you're supposed to see and view and ask about. And yes, an audit, even to review the finances, which can be more challenging in some places than others. Yeah, yeah.
Well, it's one of the three things that God doesn't know: how much money the friars have hidden.
No, exactly. And they do start off with a meeting for visitors every year. We called it visitor school, but Jose Carballo didn't like that phrase. So it was a meeting for visitors to a training. And I think I first went to that in 2007 or 8 to get a picture of what they're looking for, what do we need to do, and how to do it. So there is some training that comes in. But I had to rely on my instincts because every place, every person, every friar is different. So I couldn't go in with a script, You could tell in some places, some people are really willing to talk, in other places they're not. So it's really an honor. It was a privilege because friars are generally extremely honest and forthright. Every once in a while, you have to dust the dust off the breviary, but but to get to the truth, that is.
Yep.
But it's a special, for me. It was a special place to get to know friars. Because you're in some of the provinces, you're talking with very elderly friars. So I'm not asking when's your next sabbatical. Do you plan to travel to any country? I mean, it really is issues of where are you at in your life? What has your life been like, and what's going on now? And there can be some really great moments there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, especially in the situation with older friars. I live in a house with 19 of us, several of them older, and I can see what their cares and concerns are naturally different from mine, and it's a lot of, okay, how is the community taking care of you? How is the the guardian taking care of your needs? All those types of things are really important questions, and I can see there's different aspects to the different stages of life that you're in.
And I tried as much as possible to meet all the students in formation because I thought that was very important.
The children are our future, right?
Right. And to get their picture, why did you join? What excites you today, kind of thing. And having done Cincinnati, I moved over to Ireland, the province in Ireland. And they have a house in Zimbabwe, custody in Zimbabwe and Zambia. So very different cultures there. And on more than one occasion, Friars offered to translate for me for the Friars in Ireland, but I was able to understand. I guess being Irish, I was given that gift. But a very different culture, good fraternity, great fraternity, the guys there. And then I moved on to, I think it was Australia and New Zealand. Again, a different culture, but a great group of people, fraternal experience. And their mission was in Singapore. And I say was because now it's in independent custody, which is growing. And moving into Malaysia, strongly into Malaysia. And they had a good, strong formation group at that time. And then finally, Korea. I went to South Korea.
Wow.
That
How's your
was
Korean?
very interesting. Yes. Yeah. I know 2 words.
안녕하세요.
Annyeonghaseyo, you got it. I've studied other languages, and I made a decision. I am not going to try to butcher their language. And every time I did open my mouth, Friars would laugh, and I said, "Okay, I'm done."
Oh, no.
But there were enough people.
So how
there
did you do that?
I had
How'd you
4
interview
at
guys in
least.
Korean?
I think I had at least 4 official translators, different Friars, all good. I would say all good to great English skills. Because it's different. You're not just translating a language; you're also translating a culture.
Yeah.
And till this day in my work, I have to learn. I'm American, and very straightforward usually. Linear thinker, So sometimes when you're dealing with people, you may have to come around from both sides as opposed to go straight forward in some cultures.
Right.
It was very, very interesting. I think because like in one country, they were fascinated because I remembered their names and I called them by their first name. And I said, well, we do that in the United States all the time. But that's something that they remembered about me. Yeah.
I
I
have
can't
a
even
question.
imagine. I mean, just go ahead.
Okay. I mean, I just have a question about, especially like Korea. So I've known some Korean friars, but it's always been a Korean friar who lives in the United States, or maybe one who lives in Rome, out of the context of their culture. And this, I'm going to get a little nerdy here, but like I'm familiar with with Hofstede's cultural dimensions, and one thing that stands out is that Korea has a very high power distance. So they're very hierarchical, very structured in that. And in a religious order where we emphasize minority and humility, where those who are called to higher positions are meant to humble themselves to be servants. How did you see that playing out, and was there anything distinct about their culture that kind of stood out to you?
It's a fascinating question.
I would think in Korea their culture guided how they lived more than, as you said, about the order. There was a certain sense of equality, but there was a greater sense of respect for the elderly, doing things for the elderly, responding to the elderly. I don't think I carried my luggage once in 4 or 5 months there. I would get out of the car and go look for the luggage, and it was already up the stairs. Some friar took my luggage. I was among one of the older friars when I was a visitator, so I think that was part of it too. I think their culture. They bring their culture with them.
Of course.
They bring it to the order.
As we do too, right? That's
Yeah,
something
exactly.
particular
Yeah,
to them.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah, it was a great experience because it's a very different Asian culture. Again, the church is strong and a very small population, but strong in faith. In Korea at that time, they had 130 secular Franciscan fraternities.
Oh
Okay.
my gosh.
Now,
Wow.
Korea is the size of Wisconsin.
Yeah.
I couldn't imagine 130 fraternities, and I would say the number was about 120,000 um, seculars,
Wow.
Franciscans at the time.
Oh my gosh.
Very involved, very committed, very organized, and so there were friars all over the country who part of their ministry was to be in touch with them and to be spiritual assistants and such.
Wow.
That was quite unique compared to other countries that I've seen. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm curious. You could see the differences. Obviously, when you go around, you see Irish culture, you see Australian, Malaysian, Korean culture. Are there things that you started to notice about our culture as Americans, or as yours Midwestern, or whatever it is, where you always thought were normal, and then you began to say, "Oh, that's kind of weird that we do that."
No, nothing.
Of course not.
Of course not. No.
Everybody eats ghetto.
Yeah. Yeah. I think as I said, with Asia, you see the difference in the response to people who are older than them. There's just a total different sense of respect for the elderly, and not just elderly friars, but elderly in general. A politeness, a care for, a worry about, And I do recall bringing that back. And, the friars I've known, some now for 50 years. So, I guess I'm in the senior camp too today, but still,
A little
I need
self-interest
to
in
be
that.
respectful. Yeah, yeah. I think that would be one of the things that stuck out. Friars, and you guys have been in formation, you're used to being in small groups, sharing, discussing, and not everybody in the world is comfortable with that.
True.
They might be comfortable more with one-on-one, but not in group sharing. So, yeah, that would be something that I thought was unique for us. The other thing is there's a deep respect for those who have died in other countries. You guys are out in the parishes. You know that funerals have gone from 3 days to an hour and a half now. Sometimes an hour at the graveside. It's just that's changing in our society, where there's a great respect for those who have died, who have gone before them. Yeah, that's probably another thing I saw.
It's one of the things I love about the Friars is we have our necrology. We've got the Book of the Dead, and each day we can pray for them. It's become a little more difficult now that we're 6 provinces in one. That list is very long, but there's an anniversary of death, and we just remember them, and they could be 100
Right.
years past, but we remember there were people that came before us.
Yes, yeah, I think it's important.
I'm curious on top of this, so we talk about the differences. What are the similarities? What can you say is a common quality of all Franciscans around the world? And maybe there isn't one.
Friars are friars no matter where you go.
Okay.
I was in a room in a rec room in Italy with a group of friars and with no knowledge or very little knowledge of Italian, and I could just tell that friars were still being friars because a friar was continued to throw wood into a fireplace, and the fire got bigger and bigger and bigger, and to the point it was now burning the mantle.
And then an older friar said, "Lascia stare, leave it alone."
Exactly. Friars in many ways are still friars, and I think if you've been to international things, you see some of the similarities. I think generally there's a sense that we need to pray. Let's pray together. Whether we have the same language or not, let's try to do the best we can. Friars like to get together in fraternity, whether it's simple cup of coffee or something longer. And I would say friars like to eat together, you know. Um, yeah, I don't think
There's the
that's something.
stereotype of the portly cookie jar for a reason.
Right, exactly.
I'm on my way to making that stereotype more real.
Yeah, yeah, good. Yeah,
Tito, what
yeah.
about you? You've lived in lots of different countries, you've seen lots of different friars. Do you see kind of an it factor with the friars?
I think yes, and I think you know what Andy said was right. We're friars are friars in the sense that if we take that what that word means, like we're brothers wherever we go, and we joke like brothers, we bicker like brothers, but we take that sense of brotherhood, fraternity with each other everywhere we go, and I think that's the beauty of living together. You know, we develop those intimate relationships where you know we get along, we fight, you know, and we live our lives. We share our lives together.
Yeah, there's
Yeah, I would
something
agree.
almost like a unity in diversity, you know, because as we say, you know, once you've met one friar, you've met one friar.
Right.
You are all so very different.
Yeah.
And
Right.
yet there's something about that desire to be together and are different that we're kind of mission oriented, I think, all of us. We're outward looking, probably on the more practical side, but there's just kind of a spirit of it's going to be okay, and we're going to work it out, and it's just we're chill compared to the rest of the world in some ways. I mean, we have, you know, the two of us
so.
can be pretty intense,
Right.
but just like we're going with it, and we're finding the good in things, and I
Right.
find that avoids a lot of problems, but also just kind of brings us together.
The Franciscans as a religious order is very unique in that we are not centralized. You know, we do have an office in Rome. They do have offices in various departments and things, but we're very different from other religious orders that our centralization more often than not is within the province. And then locally, it's within the friary we live in, you know. You know, as we went through this process for 150 years now of restructuring. Oh no, it wasn't that long. I'm sorry. Seemed that long.
Seemed like it.
Seems like it.
Yep.
And you know, sharing a lot and what do you like, what you know, that kind of thing. But no one came from on high and said this happens on this date and
Yeah.
amen. I'll sign the
Right.
paper. There was a lot of discussion
was.
on many levels and continues
Yeah.
still.
Yep.
And interestingly enough, despite our fraternal emphasis, we all are kind of individual. I think that's one of the things we take from Francis is the Lord has shown me what is mine to do, may show you what is yours to do.
Yep.
We are not focused on preaching. We're not focused on mission. We're not focused on teaching. There's no one mission of us. And so we kind of just follow the gospel and however that leads us and find each other in some ways. But there's nothing, you know, pinpointing of like, you will do this. Obedience is not our strong suit.
I'm pretty sure it's why I was called to the Friars
Yeah.
to work on that.
I don't know. I have a couple of obediences I could share with you.
Oh, sure. Yeah, go for it.
Yeah,
Have you
no,
had some
no,
tough
no.
ones in your life?
No, not really. I mean, not tough in that sense. I came in the early 70s, and in those days we were called affiliates. We weren't postulants because we were going to college. And we were supposed to finish college in those years before moving on to novitiate. Formation is formation. You know, we could put 10 people on here and we'd all talk about the similarities and the differences.
The more it changes, the more it stays the same.
Exactly. I don't think I could say too many bad things about those years. I was young, so a lot of it didn't bother me. Probably one of my trying points was after novitiate, after temporary profession. There really was no formation plan for me. Even though this was in 1976, there really was no formation plan within our province or within many of the province for a lay brother. And,
Yeah, so talk about that. I think a lot of people assume we're all priests.
Right. No, no, I chose the path of being a lay brother, and that was a call way back, you know, very early on. I knew that when I went into the novitiate. So, and there was no distinction. There was no distinction before. There was no distinction during. But it was after where a program was set out for those who were going to be ordained to priest. And that program was well known, and that's just what you did, you know. I came along, and I wasn't the first, but I probably was the first in a long time. And there was no program, you know. So I was interested in being a teacher in education. So I kind of plotted out my direction to finish my education to prepare for being a teacher. But in terms of even a formation program, there was very little spelled out. Some of the things I had to spell out on my own. You know, simple thing like my solemn profess retreat. I was a class of one.
Oh gosh.
Not unique, just small. So I had to come up with a plan for the retreat. You know, which I think things would be different.
Yeah.
I
think so.
Malibu was wonderful.
Yeah.
But so yeah, after that, knew I had to develop what I was going to do next. You know, I didn't fit this plan, so what was the plan? Much of it was based on my ministry desires, which early on were education, and administration and education, and that was fine. There were good years. I was a lot younger. I could handle 180 teenagers a day. But then I was asked to move on to do development work to raise funds for the province. And so that's my path ever since, my whole life changed.
So they didn't have a
since
plan for you until they had a plan for you. It
Yes.
didn't help you prepare, but this got to be great.
I did have a plan, but my plan was outvoted.
Yeah.
So once I was asked
So
to do
Tito and I are
development,
classmates, so we went through this together. I'm curious, Tito, your experience. What he described, I don't think is that different from what I experienced for our lay brother candidates, where if you come in with a plan, you're set, but a plan's not going to be given to anyone.
I was thinking about the exact same thing. I'm thinking about, Brother Angel, who had a plan. He came in, he knew what he wanted to do, he knew what he wanted to study and work, and he executed. And there was another brother who kind of had a sense, like he knew the kind of work that he eventually wanted to do, and he knew some of the training that he needed to undertake, but there was not as clear of a plan, and so I think he kept getting filled with more things than he needed.
Sure. I'm curious, Andy, so you're brother, so not father. Do you ever get all the time, why didn't you go all the way to be a priest? Or are you going to be a priest or just a brother?
I probably did years ago.
Okay.
Today I don't hear that as much. I probably would have years ago. And then some of it was the elder friars who didn't understand. There I was going to Boston College for a master's degree. So why wasn't I going to school for theology? And, they came from a different time, and I explained to them, and we got along great. There was never any problem. But that seemed to have stopped some time ago.
That's good.
Or else I just don't hear it anymore. Yeah.
Well, and I think you were at a time that was interesting where there were lay brothers that were maybe just incapable of studying. So they were trades, and they were the porters, and they did the things because that was, they were the cooks or the cleaners. You couldn't expect them to go to school, but you were kind of that age where we had a few in our province as well that were smart and intellectual and capable and kind of in that middle ground of like, well, why don't you just go be a priest? And because I don't want to. It's a vocation. It's not just because I'm smart.
Right.
Yeah. No, I did hear that quite a bit. And I'll be honest, I don't know if my mother and father went to their grave ever understanding, but
Oh, no.
Wow.
I mean, it's just different. It's a different time, and they were always loving and appreciative and everything else, but I don't know if they fully understood at that time. Yeah.
We have a friar in our province that always likes to ask the guys in formation, are you going to be a friar, or are you going to be a brother, or just a priest? It flips it around.
Yeah.
Because we are brother first. We were called to live this charism, and there's no hierarchy in what it should be. Yep. But sometimes we do put priest first.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Oh, yeah. And I don't think I've seen that, at least in my experience in the Assumption province previously, for many years. maybe it's still out there. Maybe there's some comments made once in a while, but I haven't seen it. Yeah.
I was going to say it's just something that I experience, and I kind of enjoy getting to have this conversation on a college campus. Where we have so many friars who go by Father so and so, and some that go by brother. Some because they are lay brothers. Others like myself and Brother Mike Perry, who we just prefer to go by the title brother. And when people ask me about it, I go, well, so as a member of the order, I'm a brother. Right, so that's sort of my identity. The ministry and the work that I do is as a priest. So that's that my title in, like you would call Dr. So and so, because they're a doctor. It's the work, it's the ministry, that's how they contribute to the world, and the same thing for me. So I identify with the title of brother as membership within this fraternity.
Yeah.
People always ask, how can you tell between a friar and a brother, or are you a friar or a priest? Sorry. And I always just say yes.
Yes.
That's the easiest answer.
Yeah.
But I do love the joke I've heard a number of friars tell. How can you tell the difference between the two? And the friar apparently says, oh, well, the lay brothers, they are much more attractive. And the woman responds, oh, thank you, Father.
I love it. Yeah, I never heard that one. That's good.
Oh, yeah. It's one of my favorites.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah. Yeah, and, talking about the plan and everything else, we all, I'm sure you have a plan of where you want to be in 5 years and 20 years, but we just don't know. And one thing I find about the Franciscan life is you have to be ready to say yes to some things and try it. I was on the provincial council for 18 years. I think I'm getting a reward at my funeral.
Skipping right after over purgatory.
Yep.
But I used to say to friars, look, it's 3 years, try it. Just try it. And see how it goes. This is not the rest of your life kind of thing. And I think sometimes we're called to those, and maybe they're not our first choice, but it's amazing how they can turn them out to be good places. When I was asked my first time to go to Pulaski, I think it was the vicar of the province. I kind of just stopped, and he said, what's the matter? I said, well, I think my life went before my eyes. He said,
Yep.
I said, I have visions of a bedroom with one light bulb hanging, a typewriter if it works, a manual, and a stapler. And he said, well, we're a little beyond that, and we were. It was one of my best experiences of fraternity in the order, my 10 years in Pulaski, which was, the provincial house at one time. So, yeah,
It's amazing how many times I've heard that story. Friars, I've never heard of friars sent a place who didn't end up finding something they liked about it. But I've heard plenty of stories of friars who demanded something who turned out to not like what they wanted.
Yeah. Yep.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I mean, especially in our American culture of individualism and kind of ambition and setting your own plans, there's something actually very freeing and beautiful about our life and being told where to go. I say as someone who's never been told where to go, but in theory, it sounds wonderful.
Yeah, and I think too, you take it. Maybe it's just 3 years, But I also believe you can't stay where you're not happy, because that also impacts everything. Who we are, how we are, etc. And I think you probably know friars, they're not happy, and are they doing their best ministry? I don't think so. But sometimes we say yes because we have to say yes for certain situations. So.
Well, thank you so
That's
much,
my-
Andy. In some ways, everything you've talked about, very internal stuff for the friars, and yet in some ways, everything we've talked about is relatable to lay people. When you talk about that people are not always at the front lines, but can you support people behind? Can you be the rear guard? In terms of like getting along with your family and understanding and growing as a church, so important. And then this idea of calling and where do we go and how do we bloom where we're planted? This is human. This isn't just friar life. So thank you so much for your wisdom. Thank you so much for your witness. It's been great having you here.
You're welcome, and thank you for the opportunity to share with you, and I hope things go well.
Absolutely. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Tia, did you remember meeting Andy during our novitiate?
I do. I remember the building well, but he also came over to the house a couple of times.
Well, I just remember he was teaching English to the Spanish guys. And I just remember talking, some of them were at different levels. And I just remember, sometimes talking with them like, oh, how'd it go? And sometimes like, oh, they're making improvements. And other times like, okay, you said enough, And you know exactly what I'm talking about, those brothers.
I do.
Some made leaps and bounds. Some were just like, oh, my gosh.
Yeah. One of them in particular just really, I think, grew and was able, and this is kind of the benefit of that, right? The more work you put into it, the more you're able to participate in the life of the Friars. But the way in which we were able to joke with him was great. But yeah, I do remember Andy coming around and helping out those brothers.
Well, and just seeing him as this visitator and someone this province looked up to so much, I think they tried to elect him or talked about electing him to provincial a number of times. Like, oh, let's get lay brothers against canon law at the time. He's probably saved himself from that now that he's allowed to, maybe beyond. But good for him. Always one willing to go where he's called, and I think that's a great example to us.
Mm-hmm. No, absolutely. Willing to try new things and to go off to new places. It's very easy, I think, in our life to find a certain amount of stability and go, I'm comfortable in this little niche pocket. But if you're open, as he was, to kind of doing different things, I think you get to experience a different aspect of Christian life and friar life that will really kind of enrich your whole experience.
Fantastic. Well, maybe we should talk to him about an idea that we have. Might just come
Maybe. Yeah. Could use a little funding.
Well, thank you, everyone, for listening at home. We said last episode we'd be back in a week. It's been 5 weeks. Sorry about that. Some things came up, but we are back on it now. We've got a couple scheduled. We're recording every week. Thank you so much for listening. We've just got a wild ride ahead of us. Minor characters, some major ones coming up. We'll catch you next week.